Larry and his wife Joan were driving to their son's house. They had been married for over 60 years, accompanying each other all the way, and now they were grandparents. Today was the full moon banquet for their great-grandson. Upon arriving at the door, Larry helped his wife adjust her sleeves to cover the intravenous catheter on her left wrist. Joan had recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and she did not want to affect her family's mood on such a joyous day. Before the family gathering began, Larry sat aside eating snacks. At that moment, his younger son's child accidentally found an old photo. It was a wedding photo of Joan with her first husband Luke over 60 years ago. However, shortly after their marriage, Luke was killed in battle. The two in the photo looked stunning, prompting the younger generation to exclaim in admiration. Larry caught just a glimpse, but was choked by the snacks and soon fell into a coma. When he awoke, Larry found himself on a moving train. He had no memory of when he bought the ticket, and where had his wife and family gone. Filled with confusion and unease, Larry followed the crowd off the train. He even suspected he had been kidnapped until a woman who introduced herself as Anna approached him and handed him a mirror. Seeing his youthful face in the mirror, Larry was engulfed in immense fear. Anna informed him that she was a coordinator for the afterlife, and Larry had died from asphyxiation. It turned out that the deceased did not directly return to nothingness, but arrived at a transfer station connecting countless eternal worlds. The coordinator's duty was to introduce the rules and appearances of each world to the deceased, assisting them in choosing a place they wished to reside forever. For example, there was the 454 natural state, with a pleasant climate, and a medical world where one could practice without medical qualifications, among various worlds to choose from. However, once this choice was made, it could not be changed. If a deceased person regretted their choice and attempted to escape the selected world, they would face severe punishment, being exiled to an eternal dark place called the Void. Therefore, each deceased person had 7 days to carefully consider their final destination. Those who arrived at the transfer station would present the happiest appearance of their lives, with most people reverting to a youthful state of 30 years old. Larry was no exception. Returning to youth was a dream for countless people, let alone gaining immortality. However, this gift that many longed for did not stir a bit of joy in Larry's heart, as his wife Joan, still living, needed care. Joan was elderly and seriously ill, requiring companionship. Larry was deeply concerned about his wife, so he did not immediately choose an eternal world. After coordinator Anna left, Larry stepped out of the temporary guest room and began talking to the bartender at the station's bar. He learned that the bartender was also deceased but had not gone to any eternal world. Instead, he stayed there to work and live. Did this mean that Larry could also remain there, waiting for Joan's arrival? The next morning, Anna urged Larry once again to make a choice. Taking the opportunity, Larry asked whether those working at the transit station were all reluctant to go to the eternal world like bartenders. What were their reasons? Anna explained that among the stayers, some had not yet accepted the fact of their death, some were waiting for their loved ones, and others were hesitant, unsure of what they truly sought. Those who hesitated often felt the most lost. Larry initially wanted to wait for his wife, and then go to the same eternal world together. After all, he had promised to take care of Joan for her entire life, and that promise should continue after death. However, he found it hard to bear Anna's persistent urging, and although Joan was gravely ill, she might still have 6 months or even longer. After much contemplation, Larry ultimately decided to go to the new world first, arranging their home in a way that Joan loved, so that whenever she arrived, she would immediately feel the warmth of home. Having spent 67 years of life with Joan, he firmly believed he understood her preferences best. In the end, he chose a world filled with sunshine and gentle waves caressing the beach. However, just as Larry was about to leave by car after going downstairs, he saw his wife Joan, who had just arrived, on the ascending escalator. Like Larry, Joan had also regained her youthful appearance. With Larry and Anna's explanation, Joan quickly understood the current situation. She felt comforted to be reunited with her husband. Just as the two were expressing their longing for each other, another coordinator, Ryan, suddenly appeared and led Joan aside, saying that one of his clients had been waiting for her for 67 years. Following Ryan's gaze, Joan saw a handsome man stepping out from the crowd. It was her first husband, Luke. Countless memories surged forth, overwhelming Joan's thoughts. The two had not separated due to betrayal, but rather because of the merciless war, as Luke had died on the battlefield. Joan had once been deeply engulfed in sorrow and took a long time to gradually recover. Now, after more than 60 years, to unexpectedly reunite with her beloved in another world, Joan felt both astonished and delighted. tears welling up in her eyes as she and Luke gazed at each other for a long time, 1,000 words caught in her throat. Larry, watching Luke from the side, felt an increasing sense of familiarity. This man was his wife's ex-husband. Had it not been for seeing that wedding photo, he might not have choked on a snack. However, the Luke in the photo had a beard, while now he had a clean-shaven face. No wonder he hadn't recognized the bartender yesterday. It was actually Luke. Luke knew that Joan did not like beards, so for 67 years he had carefully groomed himself every day, hoping to present himself in the way that pleased his beloved the most, patiently waiting for her arrival. Joan finally calmed down from the shock of the reunion, but was left feeling lost. If she had only encountered one of them, she might have been able to handle it calmly, but with both husbands appearing at the same time, how should she choose? One had waited for her for 67 years, carrying the love of her youth, while the other had accompanied her for most of her life, shaped by the passage of time. Both had left indelible marks on her life, and Joan felt deeply at a loss. Coordinator Ryan noticed Joan's predicament and led her to the guest room to rest. Ryan believed that Joan would be able to make a wise choice. Besides, hadn't she longed to reunite with Luke? Now that her wish was fulfilled, why hesitate? Then, Ryan opened the door, and outside was the waiting Luke. On the other side, Larry was deeply anxious. He constantly reassured himself. 67 years of mutual support, the warmth that had become part of their daily lives, and the steadfastness in overcoming difficulties could never be replaced by a sealed past. No one understood Joan better than he did, nor loved her more. However, Joan's recent reaction had already indicated that Luke had always been an indelible mark in her heart, especially since Luke still looked handsome. Others might view waiting for over half a century as excessive attachment, but Larry could not be sure whether Joan would be moved by this deep affection, whether she would choose Luke because of this waiting, abandoning the long years spent together. Doubts lingered in his mind, making him restless. While Larry was fidgeting, Joan was walking down the corridor with Luke, listening to her accumulated longing for 67 years. During this time, they encountered a panicked man who was trying to escape from the chosen world and was forcibly taken away by guards shortly after. The man's desperate and awkward state made Joan feel uneasy. Luke also timely informed her that once a choice was made here, there was no turning back. He hoped Joan would choose him. The war had forcibly separated them in the past, and now that they had the chance to rekindle their relationship and be together forever, they should not miss it again. However, just as Luke was about to kiss her, Joan suddenly felt a palpitation, turned away, and hurried back to the guest room. Within a single day, 2 deceased husbands had appeared in succession, and she urgently needed solitude to sort out her thoughts. As soon as Joan entered the guest room, Larry followed her. Luke's appearance brought a strong sense of crisis, and in a panic, Larry took a large number of brochures about the eternal world, hoping Joan would immediately choose their future home together. But Joan was in turmoil, and frankly said she needed time to think, thus politely declined Larry. While Joan was still hesitating, Larry's 7-day deadline had arrived. Since he had not made a choice, he had to move from the spacious apartment upstairs to a small room in the basement. Larry then accidentally discovered that his wife's favorite singer, Martin, was also stranded there. A plan to win back Joan quietly formed in his mind. He entrusted coordinator Anna to contact Martin and asked him to hold a small concert in the station hall. In life, he had always been delayed by trivial matters and had not been able to take his wife to the scene. Now he could use this opportunity to make up for his regret. He was filled with hope, wishing that this performance would win back Joan's heart. However, Larry did not anticipate that this Martin was actually an impersonator, whose real name was Richard. The carefully planned romantic ceremony was thus shattered, and Larry, both shocked and angry, immediately questioned Anna. On the other side, Richard, a chronic alcoholic with poor character, soon entangled Joan in his drunkenness after singing. Fortunately, Luke arrived in time, protecting Joan behind him and stopping Richard's inappropriate behavior. Fearing that his wife's feelings might waver, Larry also stepped forward to drive Richard away. The two immediately got into a dispute. Joan, witnessing this chaotic scene, felt a severe headache and thus requested assistance from the 2 coordinators. The situation was reported through various levels, ultimately securing her a special permit. According to regulations, the deceased's chosen world cannot be changed, but due to Joan's special circumstances, she was granted permission to undergo experiences twice. She could live in a certain world with one husband for a period of time and then make a final choice based on her experiences. Additionally, there was another option where all 3 could choose to live in the same world. Joan believed this might avoid a dilemma, but both Larry and Luke firmly opposed it. Seeing the 2 unable to reach an agreement, Joan had no choice but to accept the first option. Joan first went with Luke to the mountain world number 312. There, the two traveled together through mountains and rivers, gazing at the clear sky side by side. The mountain breeze, carrying the freshness of grass and trees, brushed against their cheeks, as if time had flowed back to the passionate years of their youth. Luke did not dislike Joan's grandchildren, but was unwilling to hear her mention the family she later formed. Those long daily lives were parts of a life he had not participated in. As night fell, Luke led her to the archives of this world. It turned out that every eternal world had such places, preserving the most precious and unforgettable moments of the deceased's life. The two walked through the quiet archive corridor, where light and shadow shifted, clearly presenting every scene from Joan and Luke's shy first meeting, the passionate love, to their eventual forced separation. The images included the thrill of their first hand-holding, the sweetness of their embrace and confession, and the pain of life and death parting. On that rainy night, Joan tearfully bid farewell to Luke, who was about to head to the battlefield, not knowing it would be a final farewell. Now, in this war-free realm, they seemed to have the opportunity to make up for their regrets. As their feelings deepened, the two gradually drew closer, merging decades of longing into this belated kiss that came 60 years too late. However, in the next moment, the scene changed. Joan, who waited at the dock every day for Luke's return, accepted Larry's proposal. This was a scene Luke had never seen before. Amidst his sadness, an uncontrollable anger surged within him. He stubbornly believed that Larry had taken advantage of Joan's vulnerability at her weakest moment, exploiting her grief and helplessness. Luke left in anger, while Joan did not know how to explain to him. Accepting Larry was neither to distract from her sorrow nor to see him as a substitute. Since Luke's death in battle, Joan's memories had never ceased, yet this feeling was entirely different from her final choice to spend the rest of her life with Larry. On the other side, Larry was tossing and turning in anxiety, unable to sleep. Luke would forever remain in Joan's memories, young, handsome, their love frozen in the most beautiful moments, untouched by the trivialities and frictions of later marriage. Larry didn't know how to compete with a perfect memory. Anna reminded Larry not to lose confidence easily. After all, he was the one who would ultimately spend the rest of his life with Joan. She suggested that Larry reflect deeply on what had allowed them to walk hand in hand until now. Anna's words inspired Larry. Perhaps what he should do was not to compare, but to evoke the unique connection that belonged solely to them in Joan's heart. He thought of someone, Karen, his wife's best friend, who had passed away just a few days ago. Guided by Anna, Larry knocked on Karen's door. Unlike others, Karen appeared as an elderly woman who truly felt an unprecedented sense of freedom and happiness after her husband passed away at 72. It was the most leisurely time of her life. Upon hearing Larry's account, the usually talkative Karen fell silent for a moment. Does love need a reason? Love is love itself. Frankly speaking, since Luke's passing, she had never imagined that Joan could experience profound joy again, yet Larry had done it. With a lifetime of companionship and dedication, he had given Joan stable and genuine happiness. Was that not enough? 2 days later, Joan and Luke returned to the transit station. As soon as Luke met Larry, conflict arose again. In the chaos, no one noticed a ticket slip from Larry's pocket. Joan was caught in the middle, her emotions in turmoil. In coordinator Ryan's view, Luke was the best choice for Joan. That was the life she had missed in her youth, filled with unfulfilled regrets. Eternity was too long to bear such regrets. However, regardless of others' opinions, the decision ultimately lay with Joan herself. Joan's second experience was going to that sunny beach world with Larry. Larry took the opportunity to persuade Joan to choose him. He expressed understanding that everyone has a past, and he too had admired others in his youth, so he didn't mind that Joan had a place for Luke in her heart. He also mentioned their children, believing that if they knew their parents could still be together after death, they would feel comforted. But Joan still did not give a clear answer. As Ryan said, she had never had the chance to build a real family with Luke in this life, especially since he had waited for her for 67 years. This bond was too heavy for her to ignore. Larry quickly stated that if the roles were reversed, he would wait forever, no matter how long it took. However, the next day when returning to the transfer station, the ticket Luke presented completely contradicted Larry's previous statement. It was exactly the ticket Larry had privately used to go to other worlds, which Luke had accidentally found. Witnessing this, Joan was instantly engulfed in anger. Is this what Larry referred to as always waiting? If her life had not come to such a hasty end, would Larry have already set off to that eternal shore to enjoy himself alone? On what basis did he assume that she would choose the same destination as him? Larry's selfishness was now fully exposed. In contrast, Luke's feelings seemed so sincere and passionate. Who could not yearn for such a pure heart? Seeing the anger and disappointment in Joan's eyes, Larry was completely at a loss. In his desperation, he slandered Luke, incoherently claiming that Luke's room was filled with inappropriate posters and even had contact information for other women. Luke did not deny it, admitting that over the past 60 years, he had indeed had connections with other women, but he had also waited for Joan for 67 years. Joan watched the two men arguing, thinking of that chilling ticket, feeling utterly exhausted. She took a deep breath and asked everyone to leave the room, wishing only to be alone at that moment. It was unclear how long had passed when there was a knock on the door. Joan, dragging her weary body, opened the door to find her best friend Karen. In this tangled and painful time, seeing the person who understood her best, Joan finally felt a slight relief. After learning about Joan's troubles, Karen advised her not to be so obsessed. Since she had embraced a new life, there was no need to live for others anymore. Letting go of the past and starting anew might be a better choice for everyone. There was no need to be burdened by old matters, and now that it was time to return to youth, why not cherish this rare freedom and enjoy her own life? On the other side, Larry and Luke shook hands and made peace at the bar. After the previous argument and honesty, both men returned to calmness. They had been in conflict for a long time, fundamentally because they both loved the same person. They both saw Joan's pain at this moment and did not wish to make it difficult for her, allowing this love to become her burden. The next morning was the moment to announce the final decision. Joan had to admit that her abruptly ended marriage with Luke was an eternal regret in her heart. She had not witnessed where this love would lead. But later, Larry's appearance had, over the long years, given her a clear answer through his actions, in love and being loved, until the end of life. To have two husbands who loved her so deeply, Joan felt incredibly lucky. Yet this also meant that no matter whom she chose, it would hurt the other, and she would suffer in eternal guilt and nostalgia. Therefore, Joan ultimately decided to choose neither. She would go with her friend Karen to some eternal world and start a carefree new life. Just as Joan had boarded the train and was about to depart, Larry found her. It was the first time he saw his wife in a white trench coat, elegant and beautiful, a stark contrast to her usual plain demeanor as she worked for the family. From Luke, Larry heard many details of their past, and it was indeed a passionate love that Joan deserved to have. Thus, Larry asked Joan to leave with Luke. He didn't need to worry about him. As long as Joan was happy, he would be happy. Larry chose to step back. He watched as Joan and Luke boarded the same train, fulfilling the wishes of the person he loved dearly. But his heart was not relieved. Instead, it was surrounded by an even deeper sense of loss and sadness. Larry returned to the transit hall and saw Anna, suddenly remembering that she had never told him the reason for her initial stay. Anna admitted that when she first arrived, she believed she could help lost souls find happiness, which gave her a sense of accomplishment. However, as time passed, she became numb and no longer cared about what was best for the soul. Everything she did was merely to maintain the system's operation, until Larry appeared with his extraordinary love, reminding her of her original intention. For this, Anna expressed her sincere gratitude to Larry. Meanwhile, Joan and Luke continued the unfinished marriage from years ago in the mountain world. They climbed mountains together during the day, made new friends, and embraced each other for warmth at night. However, whenever Luke fell asleep, Joan would quietly enter the archives alone. On display were the moments she spent with Larry, warm and ordinary. She watched from below, smiling. She visited so often that the archive staff couldn't help but remind her. Only by letting go of the past can one truly move forward. However, through repeated reflections and looking back, Joan gradually understood a fact. Therefore, when Luke smiled and invited her to ride in a hot air balloon the next day, she politely declined and frankly stated that she would return to Larry. In fact, Joan was neither enthusiastic about climbing nor had she ever enjoyed skiing. She had never liked outdoor activities and was weary of interacting with strangers every day. Indeed, they were happiest when they were together in the past. That was a youthful love, free from the burdens of mortgages, jobs, and children, a love that had not yet experienced loss. At that time, love seemed to transcend everything. However, love is not just a moment of happiness. It is composed of countless experiences, including arguments, support, and mutual growth, protecting each other. Joan loved Larry, loved his companionship, loved his understanding, loved how he spent his life gradually healing the scars in her heart, allowing Joan to feel the warmth and hope of life again. This love was equally profound, just like her memories of Luke. both being indispensable parts of Joan's life. But in the necessary choice, Joan chose the more authentic path of life that they had once walked together. Joan had made up her mind, and Luke knew that forcing the issue was futile. Since Larry could yield for love, so could he. However, once a world was chosen, there was no turning back. Otherwise, one would be arrested and permanently exiled to the void space. Luke could only provide cover for Joan, helping her obtain the key to the archives so she could return to the transit station. On her way back, Joan had to traverse a sealed corridor of memories. The memories here were no longer sweet, filled with the various disagreements between her and Larry. The disputes over childcare caused by the incessant crying of their baby, the irritability stemming from the imbalance between family and career, the quarrels that erupted over trivial matters. They were just an ordinary couple in the world. However, the more piercing the arguments in the corridor, the more intense Joan's longing for Larry became. These memories might not be beautiful, but they were incredibly real, collectively forming the weight of her life. Through the trials of reality, this intertwined emotion of intimacy and conflict appeared even more resilient and powerful. The warrant for Joan's arrest had spread throughout the afterlife system, and at this moment, she had become a fugitive. Fortunately, upon arriving at the transit station, she encountered Anna and Ryan. Not only did they not report her, but they also provided her with shelter and informed her of Larry's whereabouts. Joan pushed open the bar door, and her gaze fell directly on the bartender behind the counter. This person was Larry. Since Joan left, Larry had not chosen any eternal world. He knew the rules and understood that Joan would not return. He was simply willing to wait here. That was all. In the end, with the assistance of Anna and Ryan, the two chose an eternal realm similar to the world they had lived in, stepping into it hand in hand.